So for the demo, I'm using this very simple Contoso Clinic application. And this is a simple application that helps nurses to log in and see the patients that they are assigned to, as well as patient visits. And right now, if you see, I am logged in as Rachel, who is a nurse, and Rachel is able to see all of the patient data. So there's definitely some security mechanisms we can take to restrict Rachel's access. And let's see how we can uh, restrict the access as well as restrict her access to some of the sensitive data such as SSN on this application. So let me go back to the database, and this is the database server I'm using. When I click on the database on the Azure portal, I can scroll down to the different security capabilities. And let's first look at dynamic data masking to see how we can mask some of the sensitive data so Rachel isn't able to see her patient sensitive data. So the first thing that we see on this application that is sensitive is the SSN. So in order to mask the SSN field completely, all you would need to do is come to the dynamic data masking tab. And without even having to do anything, you will see that it shows you recommended fields to mask based on the sensitivity of the different columns in your database. So we see the SSN column here, and all you need to do to mask it is to add a rule to mask this particular column. And the masking function is a default value. You can choose to customize it, but let's keep it as a default mask for now. Let's save it. And once it's done, let's go back and refresh our application. And you can see that the SSN field is now completely masked. Let's try another way of partially masking one of these fields. So let's say you have an email, or in this case, let's take the last name. You want to partially mask the last name by only showing the very first letter of the last name, but masking the rest of the characters in the last name. So for this, let's try a different method. Let's go to SQL Server Management Studio. And we have a simple command here for altering the last name column and adding a mask, which will basically expose just the first letter, but mask the rest of the letters in the last name. So let's run this command on the database. And now let's go back and refresh the field. And you would see that the last name fields just show you the first letter and the rest of it is masked out. You could also implement dynamic data masking through other mechanisms like PowerShell. So this was a simple demo showing how easily you can use dynamic data masking without having to do any application side changes to restrict access to sensitive data. Let's now solve the next problem that Rachel is able to see all of the patients, but we just want her access to be restricted to the patients she's assigned to. So in this case, let's use row level security to restrict the number of rows that Rachel can see in the query results. So for this, let's again go back to SQL Server Management Studio. And I have a simple table valued inline function here, which will basically verify that when Rachel is logging in, what is her user ID based on the user context, and making sure that the logic in the mapping table is checked and she can only access the patients that she's mapped to. So let's first go ahead and create this function. After creating the function, we have to create a security policy that encapsulates this particular function. And we have to specify the different tables on which we want to activate the security policy on. So let's go ahead and create the security policy. And this is on by default, so you don't need to change anything. Let's now go back and see if the restriction logic worked. So yes, that worked. And when I refresh the page, Rachel can now only see the patients who are assigned to her. We have managed to, using row level security, to block out the other rows that Rachel should not have access to. You could also go ahead and turn this policy off if you want to return to the original state. And when you refresh, it restores the original state. So what we saw here was how easily you can create a table valued inline function and then a policy to enforce that function for hiding the number of rows from query results based on the user context or the execution context.